In the past few years, I've been increasingly moved and at some level increasingly concerned as members of the community and our circle of friends near and far have been faced with loved ones developing Alzheimer's. It's really getting my attention. I don't want to get into statistics. There's a fabulous website called alz.org, but I want to share just a few of them to give all of us an idea how this form of dementia is being tracked and to see the increasing numbers in the US and the world and ask ourselves, what kind of impact is this going to have? And then to share a story that really touched me regarding one researcher's unique way to acquire data and information regarding Alzheimer's that he did about 33 years ago that touched my heart so deeply. Because unlike most scientific research, this researcher was totally involved with his subjects, totally connected to them, and came up with some startling data. So just some of these numbers, they kind of blow me away. But to get a context of how dementia in general, and particularly Alzheimer's, is really starting to increase. So there are 48 million people in our world with dementia, which is the umbrella syndrome of which Alzheimer's, one of the cognitive impairment diseases. Roughly and this is really amazing, in the next 30 years, 2 billion of us will be over 60 years of age. Of that, 400 million of us will be over 80 years of age. And in the next 30 years, 4.5 million will be over 100, including 500,000 centenarians in our own country. There are roughly 5.8 million Americans living with Alzheimer's right now in America, and projected to more than double in the next 30 years. 5.8 million right now. And that doesn't include the other cognitive impairment diseases. And it's projected to be about 14 million in the next 30 years. Of those 5.8 million, 81 of them are over 75 years of age, and 2/3 of them are women. In 2019, for healthcare, long-term care, and hospice for Alzheimer's patients, this country will spend $240 billion. And in the next 40 years, the country will spend $24 trillion in the next 40 years. So it gives you a scope as a human family, not just an American family, but a human family, the scope of this disease. But if you look at the numbers, remember that each number represents a human being. And then think of all the people that are impacted or have a relationship with this person who has the disease, their family, their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers, their colleagues, law enforcement officials, healthcare professionals, legal services. Millions of people are impacted by one person having this disease. So in the middle of all of these numbers, I found this project that was done 33 years ago. It's still going on. And it shows the complexity of the disease and puzzling contradictory data. And it also shows some really remarkable findings. And it's a very famous research project. It was called the Nun Study in 1986. A book was written about it in 2001. And the researcher's name is Dr. Snowden. And he embarked on this incredible relationship with 678 sisters of Notre Dame in Minnesota. He was interested in investigating aging, but he didn't really have a focus. But he decided he was going to go ahead because this was a very unusual population in that, well, we'll talk about how unique this situation was. So initially he went down to visit with them, the sisters in the healthcare unit, which are the ones that no longer could really be active in the community. He ate with them, he watched baseball games, he played games with them and such like that, trying to work out his ideas on what kind of research project could he do with the sisters. And he got his answer when he stumbled on the historical archives, not only of the order, but each and every one of those sisters, from the time they were 20 to the time some of them now 80 in their 90s, their entire health historical data is in the archives of this order, which allowed him the unique ability to look backwards into their lives as far as 70 years, all the way forward into time. So he had two really extraordinary things working for him. First of all, he had the extensive records. All right. Once again, you got to think of this as what a scientist need to accumulate accurate, consistent data. So he had the records. Second, they all live similar lifestyles. So that helps researchers make powerful comparisons between factors related to illness and disease. They didn't smoke, they were celibate, all of them were teachers, so they had similar incomes, they had similar health care most of their lives. All of these factors reduce what they call the confounding variables that either poor health care or poverty really muddle the waters when it comes to trying to get accurate data when you're trying to research something like a disease. So outside of a laboratory, he had one of the purest environments to do this kind of research just because of the similarities. All things being equal, he had like a perfect environment to do a research project. But from the very beginning, he saw some very stark things contrasts among the sisters. Some of the sisters were in great shape, 80s, 90s, working out in the convent gym, writing their Congress people about all sorts of social issues. But when he'd walk down to the other side of the hospital wing, he'd find some of the sisters sitting in wheelchairs, basically just gibbering, babbling, having no connection with the world. So initially he wanted to look to see, is there something about the sisters' levels of education that may impact mental and physical capacities later on in life? And so his primary question then became in this Nun study is that he wanted to answer, how does the pathology, like the tissue, the physical components of the brain, how do they relate to the symptoms? And because it was just this very specific disease, he wanted, and a very specific study group, he thought he could get some answers. All the nuns had similar education, health care, diets, and he thought he could say something about what might determine any of the nuns' neurological destiny, because everything was pretty much equal. What causes and conditions would he find? So he had a two-part study. First, it was involved in getting the mental and physical evaluation of the sisters. So he had it all the way from the time they entered the order, and then he wanted to catch up and see where they are physically and mentally at that point. The second one, which was a little bit more, he said, difficult to do, is that it involved asking the sisters to donate their brains after death. And he was amazed at their supporting, selfless response. This study is still going on, and 700 of them have committed to donating to science their brains. They wanted to look at the numbers, the distributions. There's plaque, there's tangles, there's filaments in the brain. And they wanted to be able to map the stages of disease, and they thought that this particular group would be an excellent opportunity. And he found two startling findings. First of all, Alzheimer's affects over a third of the people. If you get to be 85 years of age, from the studies so far, a third of us are going to develop this disease. Disease marked by this plaque, these tangles, protein clots, twisted filaments, which gradually kill the brain cells. But what he found is that Alzheimer's is not inevitable for people that are that age. One of the nuns that lived at the convent had no trace of Alzheimer's whatsoever after she died, and they did an autopsy on her brain. Even more astonishingly, for conventional views of the disease, he found that about a third of the nuns, when they saw their brains after they died, had incredibly advanced Alzheimer's. Their brains were basically dying. They had end-stage damage, riddled with Alzheimer's, yet they tested perfectly mentally bright until the day that they died. The brain was riddled, the minds were fine. How is that? Now, Buddhism says brain is material, mind is immaterial, two different continuities. This might be a clue. Another find that was harder to explain was that the writing style of the nuns in their youth predicted their mental health as they aged. When they were in their 20s, they were asked to do an autobiographical essay on why they wanted to become nuns. Why did they want to enter the order? So he had all this information in the archives. And what he noticed is simple list-like sentences. Those nuns that did very simple, just laid out bullets on why they wanted to enter the order, fared worst with 80% of them developing the disease. were those who presented very lush idea prose, poetry, and things like that. Only 10% of them developed the disease. It seemed that IQ had nothing to do with it, and that perhaps the brain that begins life making rich patterns of connection can actually survive the devastating impact of Alzheimer's. And he saw it just in their journaling. And he could track them, and then he matched them up with the nuns, and these were the percentages that he found. So the final reflection looks at the big picture, and this is where I think it comes more into our life, is what does a rich inner life and one's ability to articulate it have to do with health and well-being? How does social support, how does living in community, having your requisites taken care of, and a spiritual practice play into the bigger picture? What's the connection? So he's got all this data. They're still working, and there's no, I didn't see anything. Here's the statement of fact, and this is what we need to do. But he had some very substantial data to prove these two things. So then I got it a little bit more personal. I said, from a Dharma viewpoint, we don't know what the cause and conditions for these degenerative cognitive disease, what Alzheimer's, what's the karma? But we do know that understanding one's mind in order to cultivate its greatest potential is transformative to one's well-being, one's peace of mind, and the ability to benefit others, because their whole life was in service. That's another clue to this, is they gave as teachers most of their lives. So maybe the Buddha knew something. On a personal level, before I did my winter retreat at Land of Calm Abiding, I made 3 very strong aspirations. And one of them, because of us seeing how much of our friends are dealing with this in their families, is that I wanted to purify any type of karma that I might have created in the past that might bring some sort of cognitive impairment. I don't know what they are, so I put together my own little system of purification. I purified all wrong views, any misunderstandings or lack of faith in the functioning of karma, any remnants of a belief in a creator God that may sort of overlay my refuge and my relationship to the Buddha, harming anybody through hatred, oppression, tyranny, selfishness. There is a verse in the Wheel of Sharp Weapons that says, when my mind falls prey to suffering, it is the Wheel of Sharp Weapons returning on me for definitely causing turbulence in the hearts of others. From now on, I shall take all suffering upon myself. So any of that, I don't know, but that's what I took into my practice during the retreat. And so I look at our life here, and I look at what we engage in. We've got debate, we've got thought training, we've got memorization, we've got visualization, we've got study, we've got mantra recitation, we've got purification. Now, if Dr. Snowden's research showed anything, keeping the mind engaged and nourished seems to be a key piece. But paralleling that is that as we see some of our friends in the middle of caregiving for their loved ones with this devastating disease and seeing them being tested at their very core, we know them personally. We know some of the journey that one of our members of our community went through. To be able to keep showing up each day in the middle of this with hope, kindness, compassion for themselves and their loved ones, in the middle of incredible uncertainty of how the day is going to go. We keep hearing over and over again, they never knew who was going to be there when they woke up in the morning. What ability would their loved one be able to articulate and communicate and relate? How do they keep their lives balanced? How do they support themselves? How do they take a break? And who is this person who they're losing? Is it the behavior? Is it the symptoms? Who's there? So to see that our friends are, I think it's the most deepest spiritual practice that anybody can possibly have. And I just bow to each one of them. So on a personal level, what I want to do personally is to dedicate for all of them. May they be free of this disease, all of us. And may we be able to connect to those experiencing any aspect of this disease. And to really recall through the Buddha's words and to set a very, very vast perspective. And this is from the Upajjhatthana Sutra, to keep reminding us, and Venerable Chuni has said this sutta more than once, as I am of the nature to age, I have not gone beyond aging. I have the nature to sicken, I have not gone beyond the nature of sickness. I am in the nature to die, I have not gone beyond the nature of dying. Everything that is mine, beloved, and pleasing will become otherwise, will be separated from me. I am the heir of my karma, I am born of my karma, related to my karma, abide, supported by my karma. Whatever actions I do for good or ill, of that I will be the heir. Thus I should frequently recollect. So whatever that piece means for this whole thing that we as a human family are entering big time, is to hold that with love, compassion, and to support our community life and to do what we're doing, and to really support our friends who are, and knowing who of us may develop this disease, but to really prepare our minds and to keep cultivating the minds that we are for the benefit of all. Yeah, Venerable?
When you mentioned the women who wrote very short sentences in bullet format, it reminds me of the social media and the kind of communication that is preferred nowadays. And this came up because the other day I gave Venerable Chuni my bio to put online, and she said, "Oh, short, simple sentences are better." And so I think I've long suspected that the way we're communicating with each other is leading to mental deterioration, degeneration, just because we're not making those connections and we're not linking more than one idea at a time. And it's just, yeah. And then I had a question, were the rates of Alzheimer's in that population the same as the general population?
I didn't have those numbers, I didn't find them. They may be in the book, Aging with Grace. It would seem that they might be different, but they didn't indicate that. Yeah. And there's also one of our friends who works with some young colleagues, and one of them, I believe, is doing a thesis or a PhD on the cognitive impact of social media. So now it's been around for, not too long, but they're already interested in collecting some data to see how does this impair our ability to articulate, how to go deep, and how to really communicate in a way that is not just the way social media invites us to. So we'll see.